Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Diverse Talks. My name is Ria Renouf, and I'll be your host for this one. Today, we have Meheret Bisrat in the chair with us, and you are the Director of Settlement and Community Development at DIVERSEcity, of course. Just a little bit about Meheret. So along with the position that you hold, you are a dedicated advocate for equitable communities with more than a decade of unwavering commitment to serving at DIVERSEcity. Originally from Ethiopia, her journey with the organization began as a passionate volunteer, igniting her lifelong dedication to supporting newcomer immigrants, refugees, and refugee claimants on their journey to integration and inclusion with Canada. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right into it. Obviously, this is such a timely topic that we're discussing today. So, who hasn't seen it on the internet? Just a lot of backlash in relation to folks who may be immigrants or refugees that are coming here to Canada in recent times, and people making claims that they're taking resources and things like that. So, what are your thoughts first off on some of this rising xenophobia that you're seeing and hearing?
We are seeing a lot of anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, and xenophobic sentiments within the community and across the country. It's really unfortunate because actually the facts paint a very different picture. So immigrants are huge contributors to our economy. They're represented across every sector. So the very infrastructure that a lot of Canadians are frustrated about, healthcare, housing, the rising cost of living, and scarcity of resources, is actually the very solutions that new immigrants are contributing to. So they're in our healthcare system, all the way from birth of babies to older adult care. They're represented in our essential frontline worker field, especially a lot in social services. They also are majorly a part of our transportation industry. So they help us get our goods across the country, including our food and other goods that we all depend on. They're also innovators and business incubators and developers. So they contribute through their tax dollars, and those then go back into the infrastructure that we all depend on. So back to healthcare, back to education, back to the pensions that we all depend on. Additionally, Canada's population growth is very minimal. So for example, in Q1 of 2025, we had more deaths than births, and immigration was the only thing that grew our population. A lot of immigrants are those that come with expertise and skills that we need as a country. And they also come with different ways of doing things, right? And they contribute to the fabric that makes Canada a great nation. I think we need to point towards the facts to rewrite that narrative. And I think a lot of more people would appreciate the fact if they knew what the data shows.
Definitely. And I can just see I hear how passionate you are, and just the picture that you've painted of the importance of not just the cultural contributions, but the contributions in every other facet. It's just such a well-rounded, giving and giving and giving to this country. So I appreciate that you really highlighted that. Huge. Before we do go on, because I noticed in the introduction, you have immigrants, refugees, and refugee claimants. So I'm curious to know what the difference is between being a refugee and then being a refugee claimant, and then maybe if we have time as well, asylum seeker, because sometimes those words and phrases seem to get convoluted.
Yeah. Yes, you're very right. So oftentimes we see those phrases being used interchangeably. But it's really important to draw distinctions, because those definitions are actually enshrined in legal frameworks. So a refugee is defined under the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees. And it is somebody that has a well-founded fear of persecution. So that could be based on race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or a member in a social group, that fear of persecution is recognized through international law and recognized by Canada and the UNHCR before resettlement to Canada. And then when they're deemed in need of protection, refugees have 3 pathways to come to Canada. So the pathways are through government-assisted refugee status or privately sponsored, or a blend of both, which is blended visa office referred, which means that the government and a private sponsor work together to bring in the refugee to Canada. And upon arrival, they get permanent permanent resident status, and then they can go on to apply for citizenship.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the definition, and oftentimes that's why they're referred to as convention refugees. The difference between a claimant is it's somebody that comes to Canada and makes a claim for refugee protection, and it's a formal process where they apply to the Immigration Refugee Board, the Division of Refugee Protection, and go through something called a refugee hearing, and are then deemed credible, like their story is credible and they are indeed in need of protection. And so the grounds for that are like what they have to prove as part of their case or through their hearing, through evidence, credible evidence. So it's quite a very involved legal process. Well, they have to get legal counsel, and they have to submit something called the basis of claim and all corroborating evidence to show that if they were to return to their country of nationality, or if they don't have a country of nationality, the last country in which they resided, that there would be, they fear for their life, right? And they would be subjected to torture or a cruel and unusual punishment. And usually that is the people in power that will exert that on them. So it's not a generalized fear. It actually has to be personal to their story.
Right.
Why would they be targeted? And so they go through the refugee claim process. And if they get a positive hearing outcome, then they are given protected person status. So at that point, they can apply to become permanent residents. Right? And so that is the process for refugee claimants. And then asylum seekers and refugee claimants, I've seen it being used very interchangeably,
yes.
Right? Especially those two. I would say that the right to claim asylum is protected under international law. But in Canada, like we like to differentiate the two by saying like asylum seekers have not yet made a formal refugee claim, but they are intending to do so.
Right. Okay.
And so as soon as they make a refugee claim, then they're called refugee claimants.
No, that's good to know, because there really are some nuances there that definitely need to be underscored. In terms of the challenges, and I imagine there are so many that we probably can't cover them off in this podcast or in this edition. But in terms of the challenges for somebody who's coming from, like, let's say, a refugee background versus coming in as an immigrant, are there some key differences or similarities there that you wanted to touch on?
The key difference is choice, really, right? So by definition, a refugee claimant is somebody that is forcefully displaced. So it's not somebody that chooses to leave their home country, but are forced to leave for those reasons that I outlined earlier. Whereas an immigrant makes a conscious choice to immigrate to Canada through different permanent residency pathways. So it could be through express entry if they're federal skills or federal skilled workers, they're called. And so they want to come here and contribute their skills to Canada and rebuild their life here. They could also be coming under family sponsorship, which means to reunite with family members. So it could be a spouse or a parent or a grandparent. And that's their main motivator, to be repatriated with their family. And then there's another pathway, which is provincial nominee. So in all those pathways, the immigrant is making like is doing research, is applying to come to Canada, has to go through that process, has a lot of time to think about where they want to resettle. Like I don't want to use the word resettle because it might confuse with the other refugee populations, but basically, where do they want to live once they get to Canada? Right. And so the point of that is most of them make that decision based on maybe economic opportunities, or they have ties, family members or friends, or ties to their ethno-cultural communities. So they choose to make that their new residence. But it's the time and the liberty, I guess, to make that choice. And they have time to gather like resources. So save money, gather their assets, get their credentials and work experience validated and ready, so that they usually look for housing or employment so that they're not, it's ready for them once they arrive. Right. And if they have children, they're making choices of where their children can go to school. So it's their integration, both social and economic integration, I would say is more stable. Not that they don't have their own challenges, they do. Oftentimes when they come here, they could face culture shock or labor market integration challenges because their credentials are not recognized or they don't have Canadian experience. So they do have challenges, but it's a much more different challenge than a refugee. Somebody that is forcibly displaced comes to a country and doesn't know the language, doesn't have the resources, is unprepared for all the changes. And so there's a lot of post and migration trauma, and even ongoing trauma after arriving to Canada because of all the changes. There's also a history of trauma because of war, violence, or persecution. It's a loss of social capital too for a lot of refugees, right? So maybe they lived in a very collective culture where it was very interdependent, and then some of them come here and they have large families and no social networks. So we have intensive wraparound or case management programs for refugees to specifically address those needs, because they do need the extra support. They need an anti-oppressive, strength-based, trauma-informed approach to understanding their migration journey, and then matching their needs with the appropriate supports and services. And then our refugee claimant wraparound support program called Safe Haven is modeled around that wraparound support, which you are looking at the holistic person and all of their needs and how you can best support them through the journey. So just to give you an idea, like a refugee claim process is right now, the wait times are about 24 months.
Wow.
Right?
So 2 years. If we're wanting to put it in years. So, and is that like the minimum?
That's the average time. Well, it should be within that 24 months. So it could happen before, but some people wait that long. It's a long time. Waiting 2 years, you have to navigate the systems and you have to know how to live life here in Canada, right? So, and then the appeal process, if you get a negative decision, is 12 months. So it's a very precarious time for folks, and it's very overwhelming. And, people come to Canada, especially because Canada has always been a beacon of hope, of safety, of opportunity, security, right? So people are oftentimes looking for a better future for themselves and their children. They have to be quickly connected to legal counsel through Legal Aid BC or through our own legal navigators that are part of the Safe Haven program. And there are timelines. There are very strict timelines in which they have to fulfill their claim obligations and follow up. So they need the support of qualified staff. And we're very fortunate to have staff that come from immigrant backgrounds with their own migration journey. And so they're quite empathetic and supportive of the clients that they serve. So our Safe Haven program, we're in the second year of running it, and we're very fortunate that we got the provincial funding to be able to provide this program. Previously, refugee claimants were just a demographic that were served under provincially funded programs, but it was not an adequate level of service. Like I said, claimants require a lot of integrated and comprehensive support. It is divided, the work is divided into, I would say, 4 categories. So immigration and settlement support, which means, help with setting up their life in Canada. So as soon as they become claimants, they can apply for a work permit and they can access healthcare through the interim federal health program. They need help with housing, setting up bank accounts, or income assistance, registering their kids in school if they have kids. And, people come at various journeys. So some women are pregnant and need to have a family doctor in place so that they can get ready for the birth. So there's a lot of life touch points or support that they need in order to help them settle down. So that's the immigration or settlement part. And then the immigration part, like I talked about earlier, is helping them navigate the claim process.
Right.
So connecting them with Legal Aid BC or legal navigators, so that they do have somebody to help them throughout the legal process. Sometimes clients come to us and say, they haven't heard from the lawyer. They don't know where their claim is at, what stage it's at, and they're quite desperate. And so we support them with, working through that to identify and to support so that they're not missing any important deadlines and they understand what the process is. We also connect them with something called Ready Tours, which basically walks them through the claim hearing. Mm-hmm. And so they know, so they can prepare of what to expect during their refugee claim. And, what are the things that they need to prepare? Why is it important that you have validated evidence? How do you gather the evidence that you need? And so that's a very big part. Getting the work permit, like I said, is really important because a lot of them need to have a livelihood and they want to support themselves and their families, so they want to be able to work. If they have kids, obviously going to school for the kids also and having a sense of normalcy in their life and routine is very important. And then labor market is another big piece. So we help them in navigating the labor market. So resume writing, interview skills, job fairs, connecting to employers and employment opportunities. We also do short-term trainings around food safe, forklift training, first aid, so that they can get some transferable skills that will help them enter the workforce. Mm-hmm. And those can be expensive. So they're paid for by the funding that we have. And it really helps them with their employment and integration. And the other thing is language training, right? So that's a big thing. So they are formally assessed for their language level, mm-hmm. and we follow the Canadian level benchmark, which is the same as our federally funded language classes. Mm-hmm. And so they go through a formal assessment, and then their level is assessed. So we offer classes, formal language learning classes from level 1 to level 4 mm-hmm. on a regular basis. And so that's really a key thing for a lot of the clients because they don't speak English, right? So it makes their social and economic integration quite strained when they can't communicate by themselves or advocate for the things that they need. So we offer formal language learning and then housing and housing search, emergency accommodation support is really important. So the first immigration and settlement support is available for refugee claimants and asylum seekers. Mm-hmm. And then the labor market, housing search and support, and then clinical counseling is available for refugee claimants and the language learning. But we also have clinical counseling, which is available for not just refugee claimants, but other refugee categories, like I explained earlier, and protected persons, because trauma counseling is very important. To address the trauma that they have gone through. And also sometimes we see gender-based violence issues arise. And so we support women in fleeing abuse or needing some counseling around that. And so that's done one-to-one or in a group-based psychoeducational workshops, which are really tailored to the needs of the clients and culturally informed. Because a lot of times there's stigma in seeking support and help, mental health support especially. So we want to make sure that we destigmatize that and support clients in accessing it in a way that fits their cultural norms.
So I know we've covered a lot of ground, but if there was one takeaway that you wanted to leave our audience with today, what would that be?
You know, we all come here as immigrants, and I say all because I'm taking a decolonized stance on that, like except for our Indigenous populations. All of us came as immigrants at one point or another. And like I've mentioned earlier, it's either for safety, security, or opportunity. And it's really important to offer that grace and compassion for others that are going through that journey. And they are going to be, they are already and will continue to be contributing members of our society. And that's what sets Canada apart as a nation. So I would say compassion, respect, and treating people with dignity and understanding the journey of migration. It's not easy. It can be difficult depending on which pathway you take. But they are members of our community, and they're here to support, and we need them actually, right? So like I mentioned earlier, our population is aging and our birth rate is quite low. And without immigration, Canada's economy cannot thrive. So I think we need to focus on the benefits and the advantages that immigration brings to this nation. It is our solution to a lot of the crisis or scarcity that we're currently experiencing. So I would say that's my one takeaway that I would want people to leave with this conversation.
Rooted in facts and hope. I love it. I love it. Meheret, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
so much for joining us for another edition of Diverse Talks. We will see you in